things that don't work on their own. Chips without dip, macaroni without cheese, and me without you. Today we're talking about a case that is genuinely hard to process. It left seasoned homicide investigators in true disbelief for numerous reasons. And I want to warn you, there are some graphic descriptions of violence that may be difficult for some to hear. I'm Olivia LaVoice, the creator and host of the Casefile Presents Bakersfield Three podcast. Casey and I have carefully chosen some of Casefile's most unforgettable cases to feature here, where you'll get a visual guide to the story. Today, we're diving into case number 210, Jayna Murray. On March 11th, 2011, employees closing at the Apple store in an upscale area of Maryland were exhausted after a crazy day of the launch of the iPad 2. It was 10 p.m. and the store manager was tallying up receipts when they heard a banging coming from next door. The manager thought they also may have heard screaming and asked the store's senior manager to take a listen. They decided that it sounded like an argument, but not necessarily an emergency that they needed to intervene in. But about 10 minutes later, the Apple employees heard a woman yell, "God help me, please help me," and then a dreaded silence. Now, despite hearing that, the store manager and security guards decided that everything was probably fine. I know. There are parts of this story where when you hear them, you're going to think to yourself, what in the world? But regardless, the employees locked up the Apple store and went home without calling police or investigating the situation further for themselves. The woman's pleas for help were coming from the activewear store Lululemon, which was nestled in a high-end shopping district lined with boutiques and popular restaurants. Earlier that day, a Friday, 30-year-old Jayna Murray showed up to Lululemon to fill in for a coworker. Jayna was a salesperson and supervisor known for her bubbly and ambitious personality. She didn't mind coming in on a day she was usually off, as she knew the shopping center would be especially busy with the launch of the new iPad next door. Jayna got to work early that day and sat in the office where she did some homework for her master's program in business and communication. Having worked at Lululemon for 2 years, Jayna was impressed with the company's business model. Jayna's coworker, 28-year-old Brittany Norwood, was also working the 3 p.m. shift that day and came into work after a relaxing afternoon of yoga and lunch and manicures with a friend. Brittany had transferred to the location a few weeks ago from another store. While Jayna hoped to go on to work for Lululemon corporate, Brittany's dream was to open her own gym as a personal trainer. She was in high spirits that day because she just secured a job interview at a local gym the following week. Now, that Friday, Jayna and Brittany found themselves swamped, as it wasn't just a particularly busy day, but the usual third salesperson who should have been there had called in sick and no one else could come in to cover that last minute. But the women managed to hold down the fort, and by 9 p.m. they had closed the doors like usual. By 9:45, they said goodnight and went their separate ways. The next morning, the store manager arrived shortly before 8 a.m. and found the door unlocked. As she entered the store, she found the lights on and mannequins were toppled over. Clothing was all over the place. There was a smashed TV on the floor, and then she saw a bloody footprint. She called out and thought she heard someone moaning. The manager immediately ran out of the store and called 911.
There's 2 people. There's a woman that's alive and she's breathing. She's tied up. One person seems dead and the other person is breathing. Oh my God.
While she was waiting outside for police, there was a young man who was waiting for the Apple store to open, and he asked if everything was okay. She explained the situation, and he offered to go back inside the store with her. Now, when he walked in, he started following a bloody trail that led to the back of the store and up to a closed door. There was a large puddle of blood that had seeped from behind this door. The man tried to open it, but there was clearly something heavy that was just on the other side, blocking it. He was able to jam it open enough to stick his head through, where he saw the body of a woman that was propped up against the door. Blood was everywhere. There was rope tied around her neck, and a toolbox was on her back with numerous blood-soaked tools that had been thrown around her body. The man turned to run, and on his way out, he nearly tripped over a pair of legs that were protruding from one of the staff bathrooms. It was another woman whose ankles and wrists had been bound by zip ties. She was covered in wounds and soaked in blood. Her yoga pants had been ripped open, and he noticed there was a large rock next to her body. At this point, both the man and the store manager were in a state of shock. As officers arrived and raced inside, they quickly determined that the woman in the hallway by the emergency exit had been dead for hours. It was Jayna Murray. The woman tied up in the bathroom was Brittany Norwood. She still had a pulse and was rushed to the hospital. Now, police start combing through the store, and they were just in shock at how horrific the scene was. The registers and the store safes had been emptied out, and among the scattered merchandise, smashed TV, and toppled over mannequins was one of the most gruesome and bloody murder scenes that the detectives had ever encountered in their careers. Brittany regained consciousness. She was covered in lacerations and wounds. And from the hospital bed, she began to recount the events of the night of the brutal attack. Brittany told detectives that shortly after both she and Jayna left the store around 9:45, Brittany realized that she had left her wallet behind and called Jayna to ask if there was any way she could be let back into the store. Coincidentally, Jayna apparently had also left her laptop behind, so she told Brittany, sure, I was going to turn around anyways, meet me there and we can grab our things.
And she was like, well, I noticed I didn't have my laptop anyway, so it's fine. So I just met her back in front of the store.
It was just after 10 p.m. when the women met back up. Jayna opened the door and deactivated the alarm. Jayna grabbed her laptop while Brittany tried to find her wallet but had no luck. So Jayna gave Brittany her Metro card so she could get home and told her she'd keep looking for her wallet the next morning. And then within an instant, the women realized they hadn't locked the door behind them as a masked man came out from behind a clothing rack. He hit Jayna over the head with a metal bar as another man came out from behind another rack and grabbed Brittany. One man took Jayna to the rear hallway while Brittany's attacker dragged her to the bathroom. Brittany told detectives that he called her racial slurs and viciously sexually assaulted her using a hanger from the store. At one point, the attacker hit Brittany on the head with a hard object that was presumably the rock that was found by her body, causing her to drift in and out of consciousness while the assault continued. At one point, Brittany said she could hear voices coming from the Apple store next door, and she prayed that someone would intervene and rescue her, but nothing happened. When the voices died down, the masked man pulled Brittany to her feet and ordered her to open the cash registers and safe. As she complied with this, Brittany could hear Jayna screaming from the rear of the store. Her screams became quieter and less frequent before stopping altogether. The next thing Brittany remembered was being loaded into an ambulance. Brittany blamed herself for the ordeal, believing it would not have happened if she hadn't forgotten her wallet. After 48 painful minutes of recounting the night's events, she asked, "Is my friend okay?" Now, as Brittany had been forced to open the registers and safe, she and her attacker had trekked blood throughout the store. The size 7.5 New Balance shoe prints belonged to Brittany, meaning the shoe prints from the pair of men's size 14 Reebok sneakers belonged to her attacker. Authorities believed that the attackers had watched the two women go back into the Lululemon store from afar and saw an opportunity to rob the store and then followed them inside. Now, the store didn't have indoor surveillance cameras. However, there were cameras pointed outside the back of the Apple store, and those cameras captured the back car park shared by Apple and Lululemon. As detectives began watching the night's previous recordings, nothing initially stood out. But at around 11 p.m., just after the attack took place, two men entered the frame. They were both dressed entirely in black, and one of the men wore a ski mask rolled up like a beanie and had a backpack slung over his shoulder. The pair seemed to be in a hurry as they walked from the direction of Lululemon and out of the view of the cameras. The detectives went frame by frame trying to get a clearer picture of their faces, but it was just too blurry. Regardless, they were certain that these were the two suspects they were looking for. As detectives focused on identifying the two masked men, another lead came in. As detailed in the book, The Yoga Store Murder by Dan Morse, the day after the attack, Jayna Murray's Pontiac was found in a car park 3 blocks from the Lululemon store. Given that there was plenty of parking much closer to the store when Jayna returned around 10 p.m., this seemed a bit odd. And then an officer came forward to report that he had been patrolling the car park at around 12:30 on the night of the attack, 90 minutes after the two masked men were captured walking away from Lululemon. As he drove past Jayna's car, he noticed the headlights were on and someone was sitting in the driver's seat. 2 hours later, the officer returned to the car park to find the car in the same spot with the lights still on. This time, the officer couldn't see if there was anyone still in the driver's seat. So while he took note of this, it didn't seem like there was anything necessarily wrong, so he drove off. That said, he patrolled this car park a 3rd time 1 hour later to find the car empty with the lights off. Detectives considered that Jayna's murderer may have been the person spotted in the driver's seat, but they were at a loss to explain why. Now, the police tip line was buzzing off the hook with calls from concerned locals phoning in their suspicions on who they thought was responsible, and one name kept coming up: Keith Lockett. Keith was a 40-year-old homeless man with a reputation for getting drunk and verbally abusive, and therefore many local women were afraid of him. The manager of a nearby homeware store recalled seeing Keith walk past Lululemon on the Friday of the attack. He had had a backpack over his shoulder, which struck the manager as odd because he had never seen Keith wearing a backpack before. Keith had also been in the company of 2 other men whom the manager had never seen before. Now, Keith had a long rap sheet that included robbery, assault, and battery. And it didn't take long for officers to locate him. He was in a hospital out of town being treated for facial injuries, including a swollen eye. His clothes were covered in spots of dried blood. And when detectives heard this, they rushed to the hospital, speculating that Jayna or Brittany may have injured him in self-defense. And it made sense that he would seek help from a hospital that was out of town to try to fly under the radar. Keith's bloody clothes were taken for DNA analysis, and when he was questioned, he strongly denied having any involvement in the attack, but he did admit to being near the Lululemon store when it took place. As detailed in the book The Yoga Store Murder, Keith told the detectives that he had also been assaulted on the night of the attack, hence his facial injuries. He said he was assaulted by a short man who hung out with a much taller man. Now, this stood out to investigators because the surveillance video that they had showed 2 men and one was noticeably taller than the other. Now, Keith told detectives these 2 men recently began working together to rob stores in the area. Keith then became emotional and told detectives that he was standing across the road from Lululemon when the 2 men entered to rob the store and cut the lady. He said, quote, "I seen it with my own eyes." But detectives didn't know what to make of his statement because he was confused, he seemed incoherent, and he told officers that he suffered from schizophrenia. Over the course of the interview, Keith's story changed multiple times, and the blood on Keith's clothes were determined to be his own, and none of his DNA was found at the Lululemon store. So with no physical evidence linking him to the attack, Keith was ruled out as a suspect. Now, this next bit of info about Jayna's autopsy is graphic, but we're including it because it shows just how vicious this attack was. Now, the medical examiner initially assumed that Jayna had been in a car or bike crash, given that her face and scalp were covered in that many bruises and cuts. Jayna's face was so disfigured by various injuries that her features were unrecognizable. The crotch of her leggings had been slashed, which suggested to the ME that, like Brittany, Jayna had also been sexually assaulted. Fibers of rope found in Jayna's clenched hands matched the piece of rope tied around her neck, indicating that she had struggled to try to set herself free. However, her death was not caused by strangulation, but from a stab wound to her skull. In total, Jayna had sustained 13 skull fractures and at least 331 separate injuries, of which 152 were to her head and 105 were defensive wounds. Jayna's injuries had been caused by 6 or 7 various objects that had been taken from within the store and from the toolbox that had been placed on her back. Meanwhile, 3 days after the attack, Brittany had been released from the hospital and was resting at home, and her parents had flown in from across the country. She was surrounded by her 8 siblings, whom she was extremely close with, and they dropped everything, of course, to be with her. They were extremely worried about Brittany as she had become very withdrawn and was hardly sleeping. Now, detectives were desperate for more information, so they decided to try to interview Brittany once more, but she was really struggling to relive the violent attack. She did, however, recall that the 2 men were laughing as they carried out the robbery, the rape, and the murder, describing it as like a scene out of a video game like Grand Theft Auto. Now, while detectives were interviewing Brittany at her house, a sergeant went back to the Lululemon store as he was just really bothered by one detail of the crime. Why were only Brittany's shoe prints and one other pair found in the store when there were 2 masked men involved in the assault? Furthermore, why was there no bloody shoe prints outside of the store, either at the front or back entrance? As the sergeant re-examined the front of the store, he noticed a table had been pushed up against the wall in all the commotion. That's when he noticed that the table had drawers underneath. Opening one, he pulled out a pair of shoes, men's Reebok size 14 sneakers. The tread was an exact match to the larger bloody shoe prints that were left in the store. The store manager then explained to detectives that those particular shoes were owned and kept at Lululemon for their male customers to try on when buying pants. This was a major breakthrough, as a forensic examiner concluded that the Reebok prints appeared to have been staged, as the print patterns were inconsistent with what normal movement would show. As detailed in the book Murder in the Yoga Store by Peter Ross Range, one of the detectives said this brought him to the conclusion that the footprints never left the store because the killer never left the store. At this point, 6 days had gone by after the murder, and Brittany was asked to come to the police station, where a detective asked her to recall the night's events for a 3rd time. Now, she retold her story, and when she finished, detectives asked if she had ever been in Jayna's car before. Brittany said no, but detectives knew that this was a lie.
Do you know what kind of car she has?
I saw it once, but I don't know the make and model. I don't know.
You see, after they found Jayna's car, they found traces of blood inside that belonged to both Jayna and Brittany. But this still wasn't enough evidence. So instead of confronting Brittany about it, they let her go home. The next day, Brittany came back completely voluntarily, saying she wanted to get something off of her chest. With 2 of her siblings waiting outside, she said there was something she had been leaving out of the story out of fear.
They said, where are her keys? I have no idea. One of them punched me in my head and made me look through her coat and her bag for them. When I finally found them, they said if I was to pass anyone and open my mouth, I can consider myself dead. And that one of them would be watching the entire time.
She said, yes, I did go into Jayna's car the night of the murder. And she claimed that this was because midway through the assault, her attacker ordered her to move Jayna's car, which was parked outside the store, and threatened her to stay quiet, not alert anyone. Then the detectives did something interesting. They called Brittany's siblings inside the interview room and proceeded to tell them, "Your sister is a killer." Now, after dropping that little bombshell, they laid out extensive evidence that pointed to Brittany as the lone attacker. And it turns out those two men that had been captured on surveillance video around the time of the attack, well, investigators had managed to track them down and find that they were two kitchen hands hurrying to make their late-night shift at a nearby restaurant. And further interviews with Apple employees that overheard yelling that night revealed that it started out with two different female voices that sounded like an argument prior to the screaming began. And Brittany's injuries that she received, while at first seemed extensive, were really just a bunch of fairly superficial cuts, and there was no evidence she had been sexually assaulted, despite her gruesome story of the attacker using a coat hanger. And Jayna's autopsy found no signs of sexual assault either. Investigators believed that Brittany obviously slashed Jayna's leggings and her own to try to make it seem like they'd both been raped. Now, with all this evidence stacked against her, detectives were still absolutely dumbfounded as to what the motive possibly could have been. So let's explore a bit of Brittany Norwood's background. She came from a large family of high achievers, including herself. She did good in school, she excelled in sports, and got a soccer scholarship to Stony Brook University, where she was named the team's most valuable player. Brittany's goal was then to become a social worker, as she was majoring in sociology and psychology. But she was eventually asked to leave the university after multiple students accused Brittany of stealing from them. Now, apparently, Brittany never told her family she got kicked out and just pretended to graduate. Brittany got a job at a hotel where she was quickly promoted and given the title Employee of the Quarter. But things weren't all rosy in her life. After a bad breakup with a boyfriend, she broke into his house and stole various things, including blank checks. That ex ended up filing a restraining order against her and claimed that Brittany was physically abusive and he was afraid of her. Now, Brittany ended up violating that restraining order, but was never arrested for doing so. Now, with her new goal of becoming a personal trainer, Brittany left her job at the hotel and started working at the Lululemon store in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. So shortly after getting the job in D.C. at Lululemon, a coworker accused Brittany of stealing money. 2 months before Jayna's murder, Brittany was fired, and her boss also accused her of abusing her store discount. But Brittany disputed this, and in the end, management at Lululemon decided not to fire her after all, and instead transferred her to another store where Jayna Murray worked. After meeting with her future coworkers, Brittany sent one of them a text that read, "You have such a solid team. I know this is going to be a great experience." Over the coming weeks, several employees at the store noticed that certain items were missing. When these employees confronted the store manager, she checked the roster and noticed that Brittany had been working each time that something had disappeared. Now, 2 days prior to the murder, at a weekly leadership meeting, which included Jayna Murray, the team huddled together and discussed how they were going to catch Brittany in the act so she could be legitimately fired. They joked about setting up a nanny cam inside the store, but in the end, the team decided that the best course of action would be to announce to all staff the possibility that there was a thief among them, and then see what happened. And before their coworkers left on Friday, March 11th, Jayna commented, "I have to close with the thief tonight. Do you think I will catch her?" Jayna and Brittany worked happily together that evening, but when it came time to lock up, Jayna asked to look inside Brittany's bag. It was store policy to do so. And when Brittany opened up her bag, Jayna spotted a pair of Lululemon yoga pants with the tag still attached. But there was no store receipt. Brittany denied stealing them and claimed that she had bought them earlier that day. As the computer system had already been shut down for the night, Jayna told Brittany not to worry, they would sort it out later, and then the two left the store. On her way to her car, Jayna called the employee who Brittany claimed sold her the yoga pants. The employee denied doing so. So Jayna called her boss, Rachel, who told Jayna not to worry about it. Now that they had caught Brittany in the act, Rachel planned to dismiss her the following day. But just as Jayna began driving home, her phone rang. It was Brittany, who had apparently lost her wallet and needed Jayna to let her in the store. As detailed in the book, Murder in the Yoga Store, after being let inside, Brittany likely asked Jayna what was going to happen now that she had been found with stolen merchandise. Although the details of the conversation aren't known, their escalating voices could be overheard by the Apple employees next door. Forensic analysis showed that Brittany first attacked Jayna in the back storeroom by hitting her on the head with a metal bar. Jayna attempted to fight back, but the violent attack continued. The final blow was from a knife that was kept in the back room of the store. Now, Jayna had parked her car in a no-standing area right outside, thinking that she was just running in for a few minutes. And knowing that Jayna's car would draw attention there, Brittany rummaged through her bag until she found her keys, and she drove Jayna's Pontiac to a parking lot 3 blocks away where she sat to think about what to do next. Brittany returned to the store to begin staging the crime scene, where she used the Reeboks that were there for customers to try on. She pushed over mannequins, and then she injured herself and put her hands and feet in zip ties. All she had to do then was just wait for someone to find her. Brittany's brother and sister sat there in shock as the detectives listed the evidence pointing to Brittany's guilt. They did not believe that she could unleash such a brutal assault, resulting in murder over a pair of stolen yoga pants. And the detective himself struggled to come to terms with Brittany's guilt, telling her family, quote, "I didn't want to believe it at first either. I really did not want to believe it." On Friday, March 18th, 1 week to the day since the attack, Brittany was arrested for first-degree murder. The day of the arrest coincided with Jayna's funeral, where over 200 people gathered to say goodbye, including the founder and CEO of Lululemon. As Jayna's parents drove to the chapel, they received a call from detectives informing them that they made an arrest. Her parents were horrified, to say the least, to learn that the person who had killed their daughter was Brittany Norwood. I mean, can you begin to imagine? Following Brittany's arrest, the state prosecutor met with Jayna's family to see if they would accept a plea deal instead of going to trial. The plea bargain entailed that Brittany would serve 15 years of her sentence and then become eligible for parole, which I truly cannot believe that the prosecutor's office would ever want to offer a deal in this case, but especially one where the perpetrator might have to only serve 15 years. I don't know. They must have really been worried the case wasn't that strong. Regardless, Jayna's family refused to accept this, thank God, and the case went to trial. The jury deliberated for only 20 minutes before finding Brittany Norwood guilty of first-degree murder of Jayna Murray. As both families cried at the verdict, Brittany remained still and silent, showing no emotion. But at her sentencing hearing, Brittany broke the silence that she had maintained during the trial and begged the court for mercy and a chance at parole. Quote, "For the Murray family, what do I say when your daughter is gone? I'm the one convicted of her murder. What do you say? I know what I say today won't take the pain away of the loss of Jayna, and I hope for the Murray family someday you'll be able to find forgiveness in your heart. I am truly sorry." To illustrate the horrific nature of the assault and murder committed by Brittany, an emotional judge told the courtroom that one night he went home and banged his fist against a table 300 times. This was to mimic the hand movements of Brittany as she attacked Jayna. It took him over 8 minutes to do this. He told Brittany, "You mutilated this woman with every blow of your hand. You had a chance to think about what you were doing, and you reveled in the gore. And the lies that you told afterwards were incredible. You are one hell of a liar, man." Brittany was then sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Thank God. Okay, now this is heartbreaking. Jayna Murray's brother was in the military and serving time in Iraq during the murder. And while he was stationed in Iraq, shortly after she was killed, he received a package that his sister had sent him just before the murder. So as detailed in the yoga store murder, her brother opens this package that he knows that she sent shortly before she was killed. He does this knowing that this is going to be I cannot believe how emotional I am. The last communication he'll ever have with her. And there's a card and it said, things that don't work on their own. Chips without dip, macaroni without cheese, and me without you. Inside, she had signed, take care and be safe. I love you and miss you, Jayna. Now, I want to go back to some of the details that we went over at the beginning of the story. Now, on the day that Brittany Norwood savagely murdered Jayna Murray, seemingly because she exploded over knowing that she was going to get fired from her job as a salesperson at the Lululemon store because she stole yoga pants, she took a yoga class that day. She went to lunch with a friend and got her nails done. I mean, sounds like a really lovely afternoon. And then it results in the most horrific, senseless murders. So, I mean, it really sounds like a normal, actually rather lovely afternoon. And it just makes you realize how truly sociopathic the most seemingly normal people can be, which, yes, I know we know that, but you don't see that in women that much. And I also think the red flags in her past, like stealing from friends or even breaking into her ex's house, that's a massive leap to being a murderer. Like, yeah, that makes it seem like, okay, there's something off with her, but I wouldn't think that this person would be capable of this horrific murder. I don't know. I think this is one of those cases that once you hear it, you never forget it because it really is that horrific and shocking. Anyhow, I would love to hear what you think about all this. Thanks for bearing with me as I got very unexpectedly emotional. I've been covering crime for my entire adult life, but pregnancy hormones and this horrific of a case, I don't know, just it took me for surprise. Anyhow, thank you for watching.